It was snowing hard that night in Denver, the kind of heavy, muffled snow that makes the whole city feel like it's holding its breath. I was wrapped in a blanket on my 8th-floor balcony, hands curled around a mug of tea, watching the lights blur across the glass. The calm felt almost suspicious, like the universe had given me a moment of silence I didn't earn. My phone buzzed once on the coffee table. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. Then it began vibrating so violently it almost slid right off the edge. I set my mug down, reached for it, and felt my stomach drop. 55 missed calls. My dad, Sabrina, 2 board members, my aunt, even the family attorney. All of them stacked on top of each other like a countdown to something I didn't want to see. The last message wasn't a call at all. It was a text glowing on the locked screen. Please. I take it back. I stared at those words until the snow outside blurred into white noise. I didn't answer. I didn't even unlock the phone. I just watched my reflection fade over the message, my face too calm for what it should have meant. And I wondered with a kind of cold curiosity what exactly he was trying to take back. 3 days earlier, none of this existed. I had been sitting in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store watching flakes melt on the windshield while I made a mental list of what I needed for the week. My phone buzzed with the family group message, the one Greg used for announcements about charity dinners and Sabrina's real estate achievements. When I opened it, the words hit me like a slap. "You're banned from Christmas, fool. Don't embarrass us again." Sabrina dropped a laughing emoji 2 seconds later. My aunt added a thumbs up like it was a performance they all knew their roles in. Nobody asked if I was okay. Nobody defended me. Nobody even blinked. I stared at the screen, feeling that old familiar tightness in my chest, and typed the only response I had energy for. All good. Jackson was in the passenger seat scrolling through his phone. He looked up when he heard my breath stall. Everything all right? I nodded, turned the key, and tried to make my voice sound like it belonged to someone else. Dad just banned me from Christmas. Jackson raised an eyebrow. That's new. Not really, I said. It's just louder this year. He watched me for a long moment, the way he does when he's choosing his words carefully. You're calm, he finally said. You're never calm when it comes to him. I pulled out of the parking lot with a hollow smile. I think I finally stopped expecting anything from them. That night, after the quiet of my apartment settled around me, I opened my laptop. Not to distract myself, not to work, not even to escape, just to look at something I hadn't touched in months. A folder labeled Summit Proxy Trust. It wasn't a secret exactly, just something I never said out loud. Inside were contracts, certificates, and statements with one line that always made me pause. Hale Mountain. Realty, 18% ownership. 3 years earlier, when the company was weeks away from collapse, I'd drained most of my savings and used part of my inheritance to buy enough shares to keep it alive. Greg never knew. He would never have accepted help from me. He once said my job was safe work for small minds, so I became his invisible lifeline instead. I scrolled through the documents until something caught my eye, an unfamiliar transfer to Stone Ridge Development. A name I'd never seen. A signature that didn't look like Sabrina's, though it carried her name. My pulse picked up in my throat. Whatever was happening inside that company, it wasn't just bad bookkeeping. My phone buzzed again. Another call. Then another. Then 10 more. I set it face down on the couch. The snow outside kept falling soft and steady, like the world was being rewritten one flake at a time. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't rush to respond. I didn't smooth anything over the way I always used to. I just sat there watching the glow of the screen fade. When the 56th call buzzed, I finally stood and walked to the window. My breath fogged the glass. Somewhere out there, my father was scrambling to undo something he had started. Something he had pushed too far. Something he couldn't control anymore. I whispered into the empty room as much to myself as to him. Whatever this is, I'm done cleaning it up. And when I turned back, the phone lit up again. Another message. Another missed call. Another plea. But for the first time in 32 years, I didn't feel fear. I felt stillness, cold, clear, and long overdue. The morning after the calls, Denver felt washed out the sky, a pale gray curtain pressed low over the city. I stood at my kitchen counter with a mug of coffee warming my hands, staring at the frost gathering along the window pane. The world looked quiet, softened by the snow. But inside my chest, something old and familiar had begun to stir a memory of a childhood built on silence and uneven love. That house I grew up in didn't believe in apologies or softness. It believed in impressions, performances, and pretending everything was fine as long as the curtains stayed closed. Standing there watching my breath fog the glass, I realized I hadn't just been excluded from Christmas. I'd been excluded my entire life. The first text of the day came from my aunt. "Your dad is under pressure. Be kinder." As if kindness had ever saved me in that house. As if kindness had ever been returned. I didn't answer. I scrolled up, rereading the message from Greg that started this spiral. "You're banned from Christmas, fool." There was a time when that would have shattered me. Now, it felt like a sentence he'd rehearsed his whole life and finally said out loud. Growing up, Greg split us into two roles long before we knew what roles were. Sabrina was the legacy, the golden child he paraded around at business dinners, holding her shoulder like she was the heir to a kingdom. She learned early how to shine under lights, tilt her chin the way he approved, smile on cue, repeat his phrases. She absorbed his confidence like a second language. I was the quiet one, the daughter he used to describe as steady or soft code words for invisible. At events, he'd introduce Sabrina with a brag, and then gesture vaguely toward me like I was an accessory nobody asked for. I remember one Christmas banquet when I was 16. The room was filled with real estate partners and their wives, everyone holding champagne and talking too loudly. Greg stood at the podium and announced that Sabrina, just 14 at the time, was already the future of Hale Mountain Realty. The applause shook the glasses on the table. Then he looked at me and said, "And this is Marissa. She keeps us grounded." People laughed politely. I laughed too, pretending it didn't hurt, pretending it didn't feel like he'd carved the roles into stone. When our mother died, the gap between us widened into something no one bothered to bridge. She had been the only soft thing in the house, the only one who saw me without measuring me against Sabrina's shine. After she was gone, the house became an echo chamber of Greg and Sabrina's ambition, two mirrors facing each other, reflecting back the same hunger. I became the reminder of what wasn't perfect. Holidays turned into staged photo ops. I was always the one setting the table, never the one invited to stand in the center of the picture. I left Denver for college partly because I wanted a life of my own, partly because I couldn't breathe under the weight of their expectations and dismissals. Numbers made sense to me, people didn't. I studied forensic accounting, ironically, the very thing that now makes me the only person able to understand the mess Greg has created. And maybe that's the funniest part. He spent years telling me I didn't understand business while using Sabrina as his public face to hide his own poor decisions. Hale Mountain Realty had been slipping for years. Investors whispering, lenders circling, Sabrina smiling in perfect outfits, while Greg refused to hear the truth. By the time I finished my first cup of coffee, my phone buzzed again. A notification from Sabrina's social media. She'd posted a glamorous photo from the Summit Ridge Country Club, wearing a velvet dress, Greg standing behind her like he'd built the entire city himself. Caption: holiday season with the best family ever. The comments poured in praise heart emojis, relatives calling them the Hale dynasty. Not a single picture included me. As usual. A cousin messaged me privately. "Why did you upset your dad?" "He says you embarrassed him." I laughed out loud, a small disbelieving sound in my empty kitchen. Somehow, I was always the one who needed to fix what I didn't break. I set the phone down and let myself feel the weight of every year I'd spent trying to earn a place in a family that had already cast me as the outsider. For so long, I believed if I accomplished enough, got the right job, the right salary, the right accolades, Greg would look at me and finally see something worth being proud of. But loving someone who only loves your reflection is like chasing a ghost. You never catch anything real. Silence settled around me like an old warning. I looked at the Summit Proxy Trust folder still sitting open on the table from the night before. 18% ownership. My contribution. My rescue. And still he banned me from Christmas. Still he called me a fool. Outside, the snow thickened soft but relentless. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not heartbreak. Something quieter and more dangerous. A refusal. A decision. For most of my life, I'd been the daughter who stayed silent to keep the peace. But peace built on lies isn't peace at all. It's just silence disguised as loyalty. I picked up the trust folder, ran my thumb along its edge, and whispered into the quiet room. Maybe truth is the only thing left I owe any of them. By late afternoon, the snow had eased into a thin curtain of white drifting across the city, the kind that makes everything look softer than it really is. I sat at my dining table with the trust folder open again. Spreadsheets spread out like a map of mistakes someone hoped no one would ever find. A line item near the bottom of the page kept pulling my eyes back to it. Stone Ridge Development LLC. A transfer initiated by S. Hale. Except the signature wasn't Sabrina's. I'd seen her handwriting since we were little girls writing grocery lists for Mom. This wasn't hers. It was an imitation wearing her name like a mask. My phone buzzed again. Unsurprisingly, it was Sabrina. "Can you please call Dad? He's upset." Upset was the word she always used when Greg was furious and ashamed and scrambling to control the narrative. I didn't reply. Instead, I pushed away from the table and breathed in deeply, letting the cold air from the cracked window sting my lungs. If the signature was forged, then someone Greg had used Sabrina's identity to push through transfers without oversight. And those transfers lined up perfectly with Hale Mountain's sudden appearance of stability 3 years ago. The stability I paid for. Jackson called 15 minutes later. His voice was steady low the way it always got when he sensed I was spiraling. "Want company?" he asked. I almost said no. I almost said I was fine. But something in me was too tired to keep pretending. "Come over," I said instead. 10 minutes later, he was at my door brushing snow off his coat as if shaking off the weight of the world. He saw the folder and didn't ask for permission. He sat down, pulled the papers toward him, and started reading. "You're not imagining this," he said after a few minutes. "This signature is wrong. And the transfers, look at the amounts." He tapped the page with 2 fingers. "These are structured to move through shell accounts, not sloppy. Intentional." The word intentional pressed a cold hand to the back of my neck. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the familiar mixture of fear and clarity that came whenever I uncovered something ugly in the numbers. "Why would he use Sabrina's name?" I whispered. Jackson didn't look up, because she wouldn't question him. That hurt, not because it was untrue, but because it was exactly right. Sabrina had spent her whole life earning Greg's approval like it was a prize only she was allowed to compete for. Before I could say anything, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Sabrina. It was one of the junior accountants at Hale Mountain Realty, someone whose name I barely remembered. The message was short. "Things aren't adding up. If you can talk, call me after 6. Fear flickered up my spine, but it wasn't fear of what I'd find. It was fear that I'd waited too long to look. I closed the laptop. "I need to go in tomorrow," I said. Jackson shook his head gently. "You need to go in prepared. Greg won't take this quietly. He'll gaslight, redirect blame, the staff blame you, blame the snow if he has to." I laughed softly despite the knot in my stomach. He always has. Jackson reached across the table and rested his hand on mine, a grounding gesture that reminded me I didn't have to shoulder this alone. You have legal standing. 18% is not symbolic. It's leverage. I swallowed. I never wanted leverage. He held my gaze. You didn't want it, but you earned it. We sat in silence for a long moment, the only sound the hum of the heater and the faint whistle of wind against the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the snow-covered sidewalks. Inside, something colder was settling into place, the realization that my father had crossed a line I couldn't pretend wasn't there. Around 6, I called the accountant. His voice shook like he was talking from the edge of something dangerous. There are inconsistencies, he said. The controller didn't approve half the transfers Greg claims he did, and some reports were edited after submission. My heart dropped. Edited by who? He hesitated. I can't say that yet, but you should check the Aspen Ridge budget. Start there. Aspen Ridge. Greg's biggest lie wrapped in glossy brochures and empty promises. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I don't want to lose my job for something I didn't do, he whispered. And because people in that office are scared. We've been told not to ask questions. I thanked him and hung up, feeling the floor of my chest fall out. Greg wasn't just mismanaging the company, he was hiding the truth behind his own daughter's signature. He was risking everything, the employees, the investors, the family name, and the company I had quietly saved. When I returned to the table, Jackson was watching me with a question in his eyes. I nodded once. It's worse than I thought. He stood and grabbed his coat. Then tonight, you rest. Tomorrow, you walk in there with the truth. I walked him to the door. As he stepped out into the cold, he looked back once. Marissa, this started when he banned you from Christmas, but it won't end there. When the door closed behind him, I stood in the quiet apartment, letting the truth settle like snow around me. Soft, inevitable, and impossible to ignore anymore. The next morning came sharp and cold, the kind of winter morning that bites through your coat and tells you the day won't be gentle. I woke before sunrise, the apartment still dim, the trust folder sitting where I left it on the dining table, like a quiet warning. My phone buzzed with another string of messages, Sabrina Gregg, a board member I barely knew. I ignored every one of them. For once in my life, their panic wasn't my responsibility. By 7, I was driving across Denver, the roads lined with fresh snow and exhaust clouds drifting from chimneys. The city looked peaceful, but my nerves were wired tight. Hale Mountain Realty's headquarters sat near the business district, all glass and metal, pretending to be stronger than it was. As I walked into the lobby, the familiar pine-scented garland hung along the railings, the same holiday decorations Sabrina insisted on every year. The receptionist, someone new, someone young, looked at me like she wasn't sure if she should smile or apologize. "Good morning, Ms. Hale," she said. "Your dad's people called twice." I almost laughed. I'm aware. Upstairs, the office hallway felt too quiet. People glanced up from their desks, then quickly looked back down as if eye contact might drag them into the storm gathering around my family. My assistant Grace hurried up to me. "He's been asking for you," she whispered. "Twice." I thanked her and walked to my office without changing course. I wasn't ready to face Greg, not yet. Instead, I shut the door, dropped my bag on the chair, and opened my laptop. My inbox was full of red flags. Vendor requests, delayed invoices, a flagged email from one of the lenders, and 3 messages from Jackson. The first, "Call me when you get in." The second, "He's making calls." The third, "We need to talk before tonight." Tonight. The Summit Ridge Country Club dinner. Greg's annual performance of stability and charm, the event he used to parade Sabrina around like a symbol of legacy. The event I was very much not invited to. At 10, my phone rang again. "Jackson. Guess who just called me?" he said the second I picked up. "Greg Winter." I exhaled. What did he want? He asked if I'd be attending the dinner tonight. Said he was hoping I might invest in the new Aspen Ridge project. I went silent for a moment. Aspen Ridge, the same development the accountant told me to review. The same project sitting at the heart of the inconsistencies. "What did you say I said I'd think about it?" Jackson replied. "So the real question is, do you want me there?" I leaned back in my chair, staring at the snow falling past the window. "Yes," I finally said. "Go. Let him think he's in control." Jackson's voice softened. "You sure?" "Completely. The more confident he is, the more careless he becomes." At noon, I had a client meeting across town. The cold streets of the university district were slick with ice, and students moved in clusters with coffee cups steaming in their hands. My meeting was routine: numbers, projections, questions that made sense. A world far easier to navigate than my own family. When I got back to my office, Grace greeted me with a hushed urgency. "Your dad called again," she said. "He said it's about tonight." I smiled faintly. "Oh, I know exactly what tonight is about." I closed the door behind me and checked my phone. Another message from Jackson. "He wants me to bring a date." I stared at the screen pulse shifting. A date. "And what did you say I typed?" His reply came instantly. "I said I have someone in mind." I didn't know what to make of that. Jackson and I had always been something between business partners and something more, but never defined. I placed the phone down, trying not to overthink it. There were bigger fires to manage. At 3, Jackson arrived at my office in person. He wore a dark coat dusted with snow and carried a thin folder. "This," he said, placing it on my desk, "is your ownership confirmation. 18%. Legally binding. Unshakable." I stared at my name on the document, stark and powerful. "If Greg finds out..." "He already has," Jackson said softly. "He just hasn't processed what it means yet." Something inside me shifted then, something cold and steady. Fear had lived in my body for so long that its absence felt unfamiliar. I met Jackson's eyes. "Then he can find out the hard way." He stayed a moment longer, studying my face like he was making sure I wasn't about to fall apart. I didn't. For the first time in years, the ground under my feet felt solid. When he left, I stood at the window watching cars trail through the snow. Tonight, Greg would stand in a gold-lit ballroom surrounded by donors, investors, and the illusion of success he'd curated for decades. And for the first time, I would not be outside looking in. I wouldn't be the daughter he dismissed, the one he banned from Christmas, the one he humiliated in front of relatives. Tonight, I would be the one holding the truth, and he had no idea it was coming. Snow drifted in slow, deliberate swirls as Jackson pulled up to the circular entrance of Summit Ridge Country Club, the kind of place where every wreath was perfectly symmetrical and every light was meant to flatter men like my father. The valet opened my door before I had fully stepped out, and the blast of warm air from the lobby hit my face like a stage cue. Inside, a string quartet played near a towering Christmas tree hung with gold ornaments. Women in sequined gowns drifted across the marble floor, and men in tailored suits laughed too loudly, glasses already raised. This was Greg Hale's preferred ecosystem rooms, full of applause, admiration, and people pretending they wished they were him. For the first time in my life, I walked in without feeling like I had something to prove. 2 women near the registration table glanced at me and whispered behind their hands. I thought she wasn't invited. She wasn't. Their voices were thin as tinsel, but I heard every word. I didn't flinch. Let them talk. From the doorway, I scanned the ballroom. Greg stood beneath a chandelier, beaming, gesturing broadly as if the room had been built solely to spotlight him. Sabrina stood at his side in a velvet red dress, smiling so hard her cheeks strained. They looked like a portrait of legacy wealth charm, curated perfection. People circled them like planets around the sun. I stayed at the edges, letting my eyes adjust to the brightness. Greg spotted me first. He froze for half a second, just long enough to betray himself, Then his expression snapped back into its familiar public smile. He pushed through the crowd with the enthusiasm of a man pretending he wasn't horrified. "Marissa." "What a surprise," he said through clenched teeth. "Didn't think you'd make it." I smiled back. I wasn't invited. A ripple of nervous laughter floated around us, the kind that came from people unsure whether it was safe to laugh. Greg's jaw tightened, but he plastered on a grin. "Every family has surprises during the holidays." Sabrina appeared beside him, voice soft but sharp. "Please don't ruin Dad's night. He has a lot riding on this event." Her eyes flicked to my dress, then to the room, calculating the optics. Even now she was managing the Hale brand. She lifted her champagne flute like it was a shield. "Just be careful where you stand." My gaze dropped to her earrings. Our mother's earrings. The ones she used to wear every Christmas Eve. Sabrina had taken them without asking, or maybe Greg had given them to her. Either possibility left a cold ache in my chest. Before I could respond, Jackson joined us. The moment he arrived, the dynamic shifted. Greg straightened, Sabrina brightened, and nearby guests suddenly pretended to care about Hale Mountain's future. Greg reached for Jackson's hand with both of his. "So glad you're here. I'd love to discuss our new project." Jackson nodded politely. "We'll get to that." Greg blinked, thrown off by the lack of deference. Sabrina stepped into the gap with a polished smile. "Jackson, you look wonderful tonight. Did you bring someone?" She tilted her head, angling her expression for the photographers drifting through the room. Jackson's eyes flicked to me. "I did." The color drained from Sabrina's face. Several guests nearby glanced in my direction, whispering. Rumors always traveled faster in rooms filled with people desperate to stay relevant. I turned and began walking deeper into the ballroom. Conversations paused as I passed. Twice someone asked if I was the accountant daughter. Once a man said, "We never see you at these." His tone made it clear that was the point. I gave him a polite smile that wasn't polite at all. As the music softened, a bell chimed from the stage. Greg ascended a small platform, a champagne glass in hand. Sabrina followed, shining under the lights like the perfect daughter he molded her into. The crowd drifted toward them, eager to hear the annual speech that promised success and stability. Greg lifted his glass, his voice warm and booming. "This year, Hale Mountain Realty stands stronger than ever. Through resilience, vision, and partnerships built on trust," I almost laughed at the word trust. Sabrina's smile widened when Greg praised her incredible work, her commitment to legacy. Guests murmured approval, raising their glasses. Greg didn't mention me, not even in passing. He didn't look at me, not once. Finally, he turned slightly toward Jackson's table. "And I want to thank one of our most valued friends tonight. A man who sees Hale Mountain's future the same way I do Jackson Ward." People applauded loudly. Jackson rose with a slow, steady composure. When the room fell silent, he said, "Thank you, Richard. I appreciate the invitation." Greg beamed like he'd won something. Then Jackson added, "Before we talk about vision, I invited someone tonight. Someone who believes in transparency." A ripple of curiosity moved across the ballroom. The doors behind us opened. Cold air drifted in. I stepped forward, heels clicking against marble, eyes turning, breath catching. A hush spread through the room like spilled wine across a tablecloth. Greg's smile faltered. Sabrina's fingers tightened around her glass. Someone whispered, "Isn't she the one banned from Christmas?" I stopped at the center of the room, every chandelier reflecting off the envelope in my hand. The one with my 18% ownership inside. For the first time in my life, all eyes were on me. And I wasn't afraid. The music faded so suddenly it felt intentional, like even the quartet sensed something was about to snap. Greg stood frozen on the platform, champagne raised but no longer performing. His smile had stalled, halfway stuck between confidence and panic. I walked toward him slowly, the envelope in my hand a small, quiet blade. Eyes followed me across the ballroom, curious, confused, hungry. Greg forced a laugh as I reached the foot of the stage. "Marissa, sweetheart," he said, voice cracking on the first syllable. "I didn't expect you tonight." "I know," I replied. He blinked too fast, the first sign the performance was slipping. He gestured to the envelope. "What's that?" Before I could answer, Jackson stepped up beside me and offered the envelope to Greg like an unexpected bill. "Something you should see," he said softly. Greg's hand trembled as he unfolded the document. For a moment he didn't speak. His eyes scanned the heading, then froze on a single line near the middle. His voice dropped to a whisper. 18%. Yes, I said, for 3 years. A shockwave moved through the crowd. Tiny gasps, whispered curses, the sound of reputations recalculating. Sabrina stepped closer, her face draining of color. "Dad," she breathed. He snapped the papers shut and cleared his throat, masking fear with a brittle laugh. "This is clearly a clerical misunderstanding. My daughters are confused." Jackson's voice cut through the room. "There's no confusion. She's the largest minority shareholder." Conversations broke open like ripples on water. A donor at the front exchanged a wide-eyed look with his wife. A banker whispered to a colleague. A board member lowered his drink, suddenly sober. Sabrina grabbed the document from Greg and scanned it. Her hands shook as she read her own name printed beside a signature that wasn't hers. "I didn't sign this," she whispered, barely audible. Greg reached for her, but she stepped back. I pulled another sheet from the envelope and held it up. "Stone Ridge Development," I said. "A company you've been transferring funds to. This signature," I pointed at the scrawl at the bottom, "is not Sabrina's." Greg's voice pitched up sharp and angry. "That's enough. We are not doing this here." A board member stepped forward. "Richard, is there something you need to disclose?" Greg's face reddened. "This is family business. Private. Not when fraudulent transactions affect company assets," Jackson replied. The word fraudulent spread through the ballroom like heat. People edged closer, pretending to reach for drinks just to hear better. Greg turned on me, voice low and venomous. "You come in here uninvited and try to humiliate me in front of people who matter?" I didn't flinch. "You banned me from Christmas," I said quietly. "But you forgot who's been keeping this company alive." A few people gasped. Someone let out a single startled laugh before swallowing it back. Greg's eyes flashed. Fury, then fear, then something far more fragile. "The company is fine," he insisted. "We're stable." A man near the back said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "If you're stable, why are lenders calling us?" Greg's head snapped around. "What did you say?" But the cracks had already spread. Jackson stepped forward. "Under shareholder rights, Marissa is entitled to request immediate financial transparency." Greg stalled, lost his footing for the first time in 20 years. "You brought him here?" he asked me. Voice trembling. "I invited a partner." I said, "You just didn't know who I was." Sabrina looked between us, horror dawning in her eyes. "Dad," she whispered, voice breaking. "What did you sign?" Greg ignored her. He shoved the papers at me, hands shaking, chest rising and falling too fast. "We talk about this privately." "That's an order." "I'm not your child in this moment," I said. "I'm a shareholder." A silence so heavy it felt like gravity shifted. The chandelier lights reflected off the marble floor in sharp fractures. My heels echoed as I stepped closer, offering him the truth he'd spent his life avoiding. "Maybe next year," I said softly, "you'll remember who pays the bills." His face contorted anger, humiliation, a lifetime of dominance collapsing in the span of a breath. He turned to flee the stage, but Jackson stepped subtly into his path, gentle but immovable. "We're not done." Guests' whispered phones hovered near hands, pretending to check messages, but really waiting to record a downfall. Sabrina's voice broke the tension. "Dad, please, tell the truth." Greg rounded on her. "Not you too." But his voice cracked. The room heard it. Everything that made Greg Hale untouchable, his arrogance, his certainty, his control crumpled in front of 100 people dressed in glittering gowns and tailored suits. And then, in a voice suddenly small, he called after me as I turned away. "Marissa, wait." I stopped but didn't turn. The room held its breath. "We can fix this," he said. "Just come back to the table." I let that plea settle in the air, heavy and brittle. "Some things don't need fixing," I said. "They just need an ending." I walked out, leaving him standing under the chandelier that suddenly felt too bright, too exposed, too honest. Outside, the cold air hit me clean and sharp. Snowflakes melted against my cheeks as Jackson caught up beside me. "You handled that perfectly," he said. I didn't answer. I just looked back through the glass where Greg stood motionless, while the empire he built on illusion began to tilt under the weight of its first real truth. The night was quiet, and for the first time in years, so was I. The hallway outside the ballroom felt colder than the winter night, the kind of cold that slips under your skin and settles there. Jackson and I stood in the wide corridor lined with portraits of men who had built fortunes out of polished charm and half-truths. Behind the closed doors, the hum of whispered gossip swelled Greg's empire, already cracking in real time. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. An email notification glowed on the screen. "There's something you need to see. Please call me tonight." It was from Hale Mountain Realty's controller, a man who had never contacted me directly before. My pulse stuttered. Before I could open the message, the doors swung violently. Greg stumbled out with 2 board members trailing behind him, their whispers sharp, urgent. They shut the door behind them and herded him down the hallway like men escorting a drunk friend out of a bar. Greg shook them off. "I'm fine," he barked, though he looked anything but. His eyes were bright with panic, his skin pale under the chandelier light. One board member lowered his voice. "Richard, the lenders called this afternoon. They're worried about Aspen Ridge. We need numbers." Greg spun toward him. "The numbers are fine." "They're not," the man replied. And tonight didn't help. Greg looked at me, then really looked at me. His gaze flickered between anger and something close to fear, like he finally realized the stage lights he adored were illuminating the wrong truth. He stormed past us toward the private lounge. The board members followed, closing the door behind them. Through the frosted glass, I saw Greg pacing, hands slicing the air in frantic gestures. The muffled cadence of accusation bled through the door. Then a board member's voice rose above the rest. "If your daughter's signature is forged, you need to explain." Jackson placed a hand lightly on my arm. "Come on," he said. "Let's give them space, and you need to see this." He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a folder he had organized long before tonight. He handed it to me. Inside were emails flagged vendor reports, discrepancies that made my breathing go shallow. Missing invoices, duplicate entries. Internal memos requesting clarification on transfer dates. Transactions to Stone Ridge Development structured in a pattern meant to avoid detection. I knew what I was looking at. I'd seen it before in other companies on the brink of collapse. "This isn't incompetence," Jackson said quietly. "This is deliberate." The word deliberate made the hallway feel even colder. Before I could speak, my phone rang. "The controller." I answered. His voice trembled. "Ms. Hale, I'm sorry. I shouldn't be calling you, but things aren't adding up. Some of us—" He lowered his voice. "We're scared." The controller before me flagged concerns. The transfers to Stone Ridge were rushed undocumented, and the reconciliation files were edited after submission. My grip tightened on the phone. "By who?" "I don't know yet," he whispered. "But you should look at Aspen Ridge's budget. That's where the truth starts leaking." My stomach dipped. "Why are you telling me this?" He exhaled shakily. "Because if this blows up, the staff will be blamed. We just want transparency, and because—" You're the only Hale who might actually do something." When I hung up, the hallway seemed to tilt. I looked at Jackson. "It's worse than I thought," I figured he said. "That's why I didn't want you walking into tonight blind." Before we could say more, the restroom door opened and Sabrina stumbled out. Her mascara was smeared, her hands shaking. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. "Is it true?" she whispered. "That signature? It's not mine." Her voice cracked. "He made me sign something last month. Told me to sign quickly, don't ask questions. But I thought it was for a vendor discount. Nothing else." Her eyes filled. "I didn't know he was using my name." I softened, but only a little. "Sabrina, he shouldn't have put you in that position." She looked down, cheeks blotchy. "I wanted him to trust me, to think I could help him." Her voice shrank. "I didn't know he'd use me like this." Before I could respond, the club manager approached us nervously. "Ms. Hale, Mr. Ward." "I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an issue with the event invoice." Greg must have sensed trouble because he burst into the hallway the next second. "What issue?" The manager wrung his hands. "Your card declined, sir." The words dropped like ice into the hallway. Guests nearby stopped talking. Greg's face drained. "Run it again." "We did," the manager said gently. "Both cards." Whispers sparked instantly around us, spreading like dry brush catching flame. "If he can't pay the club, what about the investors? Is Aspen Ridge collapsing?" Greg's mask splintered. "This is a mistake," he snapped. "A technical error." But everyone heard the desperation in his voice. He turned toward me as if reaching for the nearest lifeline. "Marissa, could you?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "Not tonight." He froze. Something inside me, something quiet, long buried, finally settled into place. Jackson stepped forward, calm and composed. "I can cover it," he told the manager. Then to Greg. "And I'll need the full repayment within 30 days. The message was clear. Greg no longer controlled the room. He no longer controlled anything. Sabrina covered her mouth, tears sliding silently. I looked at Greg, really looked at him, not as my father, not as the man who set the rules of my childhood, not as the tyrant who expected applause, but as a man undone by his own lies. "We start the audit tomorrow," I said quietly. His shoulders sagged, his breath shuddered. "Marissa, please." But I walked past him, Jackson beside me, leaving Greg Hale standing in the wreckage of the reputation he cared for more than his own family. Outside, the night air was sharp and clean, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the truth. The morning sky over Denver hung low and heavy, a dull, pewter haze that seemed to press the world into silence. Frost clung to the edges of my windshield as I pulled into the parking garage beneath Hale Mountain Realty. I sat there for a moment, hands wrapped around the steering wheel, steadying my breath. Today wasn't going to be graceful. It wasn't going to be gentle. But it was necessary. Inside the lobby, the receptionist glanced up with startled eyes. Conversations hushed. Employees, pretending to be absorbed in their screens, stole quick looks at me over the tops of their monitors. Rumors had traveled fast. Jackson's reveal, Greg's meltdown, and me no longer the invisible Hale daughter, but the woman carrying the truth no one wanted to touch. An intern brushed past me, then hesitated and slipped a folded note into my hand. "We're with you," she whispered before scurrying away. Inside the note were 4 words written in trembling ink. We kept the real numbers. Fear and loyalty tangled in that tiny sentence. A quiet uprising in a place built on silence. When I stepped into the boardroom, the air felt stiff, brittle, like the room itself was bracing for impact. 7 board members sat in rigid formation around the mahogany table, coffee cups, untouched, eyes sharp but tired. Greg arrived last late, shoulders hunched, skin sallow under the winter light. He attempted a smile, it cracked instantly. Sabrina hovered behind him like a ghost, eyes rimmed red. I took my seat at the opposite end of the table. Funny how symbolic a piece of furniture becomes when the truth finally fills the space between people. "We need to begin," said Harold, the eldest board member, clearing his throat. "There are serious concerns." Greg straightened as if preparing for applause. "This is a misunderstanding. My daughters." "We'll stop you right there," another board member interrupted. "We've requested certified numbers, vendor logs, loan covenants, and updated payables. None have been provided." Greg's jaw flexed. "It's the holidays." "Staff is behind. The lenders aren't behind," Harold said quietly. "They're alarmed." The word alarmed cut through the room. Greg's face reddened. He opened his mouth, but I rose before he could reclaim the floor. 18% ownership gives me the right to request immediate clarification," I said, sliding a copy of my trust documents onto the table, "and to demand transparency on recent transfers." Greg slammed his hand on the table. "You're being dramatic." I didn't raise my voice. "I'm being accurate." Silence rippled across the room. Sabrina's breath hitched. She looked at me, then at our father, her loyalty cracking in real time. A board member slid an email printout across the table toward Greg. "This came from one of our lenders yesterday. They flagged material discrepancies in the Aspen Ridge budget." The color drained from Greg's face. "That's overblown speculation." Another member leaned forward. "Richard, your daughter's signature appears on a document she didn't sign." "Care to explain?" Greg's mask faltered. "She misunderstood." "I didn't," Sabrina whispered. Her voice was thin but steady. "I didn't sign that transfer. Or the others." The boardroom stilled. Greg stared at Sabrina as if seeing her for the first time. Then he rounded on me. "This is your doing." I met his gaze. "Your actions are your doing." For the first time, he had no rebuttal. Harold cleared his throat. "We need an interim financial officer. We cannot proceed without oversight." Greg shot to his feet. "You will not sideline me in my own company. If you refuse transparency," Harold replied, "regulators will force it." The truth hit Greg like a physical blow. He staggered back slightly, gripping the chair. A soft knock interrupted the tension. The door opened, and Jackson stepped inside, calm as winter morning light. He carried a folder, thin, neat, devastating. "Apologies for interrupting," he said, "but the trust is entitled to full disclosure. I've brought documentation." He placed the folder before Greg. Inside were vendor complaints, late payments, hidden liabilities, lender warnings, each page a quiet indictment. "You built a legacy on charm," Jackson said gently. "But charm can't fix numbers." Greg sank slowly into his chair, the fight draining from his eyes. Harold spoke again. "We have to vote. Governance review and temporary transfer of financial authority." Hands rose across the table one by one. Even Sabrina's. Greg exhaled as if someone had punctured him. "You too," he whispered. She didn't answer. The motion passed. The room didn't celebrate. It simply breathed like a house surviving a storm. When the meeting adjourned, Greg remained seated, staring at nothing. I walked to the door but hesitated when he finally spoke. "You've ruined everything," he murmured. I turned back. "No. I'm saving what can still be saved." His eyes shimmered with something dangerously close to grief. As I stepped into the hallway, my phone buzzed. A new message from the family estate attorney. "I believe it's time you read your mother's addendum." The snow outside the window drifted slow and silent. Something deep inside me shifted like a door unlocking. And for the first time, I wasn't bracing anymore. I was ready. The email from the estate attorney sat open on my phone long after the boardroom emptied its single sentence, burning through the numbness settling in my chest. Your mother left an addendum. You were not told earlier for reasons I will explain. Outside, snow drifted past the tall windows, each flake catching the pale winter light like a message trying to reach me through years of silence. I didn't wait to think. I grabbed my coat, walked out of the building, and drove through the muted Denver streets toward the attorney's office, my heart beat steady in a way it hadn't been since childhood. His office was small, warm lamps glowing against dark wooden shelves, a place built for difficult truths. He stood when I entered. Marissa, he said gently, your mother wrote something for you and your sister. She intended it to be read only when necessary. He opened a drawer, pulled out a sealed envelope, and placed it in my hands. My mother's handwriting curved across the front. For my daughters, when truth needs a place to stand. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. The first line made my breath catch. My girls. If you are reading this, then the things I feared have finally begun. I sank into the chair as the room seemed to narrow around me. Her words were soft, deliberate, full of love, but threaded with warnings she must have carried alone for years. She wrote about Greg's pride, how it had grown sharper as his success mounted, how he had begun confusing admiration with love, applause with identity, how she worried the company would swallow him whole, and that he would not notice he was dragging his daughters with him. Then she wrote about us. Sabrina shines bright, but she shines for others. She mirrors your father's ambition sometimes without knowing it. You, Marissa, you shine steady. Truth sits in your bones. I know you don't feel seen, but I see you. The words blurred as tears stung my eyes. My mother had always been the one place in the house where emotion wasn't considered weakness. She used to brush my hair, telling me that being quiet wasn't the same as being small, that someday quiet would be my strength. I never knew she had put those beliefs into writing. I never knew she had prepared for a day like this. She went on. If the company ever faces a crisis of integrity, authority must not stay with the one who craves power. It must go to the one who protects truth. If that day comes, I trust you, Marissa, to steady what he cannot. I closed my eyes, a deep, aching breath filling my chest. She had seen everything long before I did. The door opened behind me. Sabrina stood there, cheeks pink from the cold hair still pinned from the night before, mascara smudged in the corners of her eyes. I followed you, she whispered. I saw your car. The attorney handed her his copy of the letter. For a moment, Sabrina looked reluctant to read it, terrified almost. But she sat beside me and unfolded the pages. It didn't take long before she pressed her fingers to her mouth. She knew, she said, voice cracking. She knew Dad would drown us in his ambition. She knew I'd try to be what he wanted. And she knew you'd be the one to tell the truth. Her shoulders shook. I always thought she loved you differently. I looked at her. She didn't. She just understood me differently. Sabrina wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. I wanted him to be proud. That's why I signed everything he gave me. I didn't ask questions because asking questions made him look disappointed. I felt that sentence like a punch. I know, I said softly. I spent my whole life trying not to disappoint him too. Sabrina lowered her gaze. But he used me, Marissa. That signature. He didn't even warn me, and I didn't want to believe it until tonight. The attorney cleared his throat gently. Your mother left legal instructions, he said. Her letter triggers shared authority between the two of you during a review if Greg jeopardizes the integrity of the company. Sabrina looked stunned. She planned for this. She hoped she was wrong, he said. But she planned anyway. We left the office with the letter tucked between us like a fragile bridge. Snow coated our coats as we walked toward my car. Sabrina's breath came out in shaky clouds. What happens now, I didn't answer immediately. The streetlights cast a golden glow across the drifting flakes, the world quiet enough to hear my own heartbeat. We follow Mom's letter. I finally said. We tell the truth. No more pretending. Sabrina nodded, though fear flickered in her eyes. When we reached the car, my phone buzzed again. A new message from the controller. We found another discrepancy, bigger than the rest. The cold sank deeper into my bones. I glanced at Sabrina. It's starting. She nodded. Then we deal with it together. I slid into the driver's seat, the letter resting across my lap. For the first time in years, I felt my mother's presence in the quiet of my own breathing. I whispered into the stillness, "I'll do it, Mom." And as I pulled away from the curb, snow swirling in the headlights, I knew the next truth waiting for us wasn't going to be gentle. But I was finally ready to face it. The house glowed too brightly when we pulled up that evening, every downstairs lamp blazing, as if light alone could hide the fractures running through the family. Snow covered the walkway in a clean sheet of white, untouched, the kind of surface that made you hesitate to leave footprints. I stood on the porch for a moment, listening to the low murmur of voices inside. It sounded like every holiday from my childhood tents, cheerful on the surface and simmering quietly underneath. When I pushed open the door, the smell of roast and cinnamon candles washed over me. The table was already set in the dining room, silverware gleaming garland trailing across the center. Cards marked each seat. Mine predictably sat at the far end, the same spot they'd stuck me in every Christmas since I was old enough to understand seating arrangements were just another way to assign value. I lifted my card, carried it across the room, and placed it by Sabrina's. The soft tap of it hitting the tablecloth was quiet, but the room still paused. Greg stood near the head of the table, adjusting his cufflinks like nothing had happened the night before. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice tight. "Remember, no business tonight. Family only." I nodded. Of course. The lie hung between us like a chandelier crystal catching light. Relatives filled their seats with stiff politeness. My aunt murmured something about the newspaper article she tried not to read. A cousin scrolled through his phone under the table, pretending to be invisible. Sabrina moved through the kitchen with steps too controlled, her dress sleeves rolled up, her expression a careful mask. When she reached my side, she whispered, "Thanks for sitting here." She tried to smile. It wobbled. Dinner began the way all Hail dinners did, with Greg making a speech no one asked for. "This family has always been built on strength," he said, raising his glass. "On unity, on tradition." I stared down at my plate, letting his words wash over me. He spoke like a man who believed a story long after the story stopped being true. The others nodded in shameful unison, the choreography of a family trained to keep peace at any cost. Greg lifted his glass higher. "And to Sabrina," he said, "for being the backbone of this family during a difficult year." He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was louder than the toast. Halfway through dinner, the doorbell rang. Greg excused himself and disappeared into the hallway. Voices rose, anxious, clipped, and then the catering manager followed him back into the dining room. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Hale," she said softly. "Your payment declined." The room froze. Forks hovered in midair. Someone coughed. Even the candles seemed to flicker with embarrassment. Greg forced a smile that looked painful. "Run it again." "We did," she whispered. Two of my relatives lowered their eyes to their plates, suddenly fascinated by the mashed potatoes. Greg turned toward me, desperation cracking his voice. "Marissa, could you—" "No," I said. Calm, sharp, final. He stared at me like he didn't recognize the word. Jackson rose from his seat at the end of the table. "I can cover it," he told the manager, "as long as the receipt stays in your name. And Richard will reimburse me within 30 days. The message wasn't subtle. Greg swallowed hard, nodding. The woman thanked Jackson and slipped out. The room sat in thick silence, everyone pretending not to have witnessed the humiliation. Dessert was served, but mostly untouched. The air had changed texture, heavy and brittle. Finally, Sabrina reached into her pocket and placed a folded slip of paper onto the table. The pawn ticket. Her hands trembled. "Tomorrow morning," she said quietly, "Marissa and I are getting Mom's ring back." Greg stared at the slip of paper like it was written in a language he used to know but no longer understood. His expression crumpled into something that almost resembled remorse, or maybe just exhaustion. After dinner, I carried dishes to the kitchen. Sabrina followed her facade, finally slipping. She set a plate down and gripped the counter. "I can't do it anymore," she whispered. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine. I can't keep making excuses." "You don't have to," I told her. "Not anymore. I feel like everything I believed was a lie." Her voice cracked. "I thought loyalty meant protecting him." I handed her a dish towel. "Loyalty doesn't mean enabling." She nodded, eyes filling. When we stepped back into the dining room, Greg stood alone by the window, staring out into the snow. His reflection in the glass looked older than he had yesterday, folded in on itself like the weight of his secrets had finally settled on his shoulders. He didn't turn when I approached. "I didn't ask you to be the bank," he said quietly. "I'm not," I answered. "Not anymore." His eyes flickered the smallest hint of something human passing through them. Maybe regret. Maybe recognition. Maybe just the fear of a man realizing he no longer controlled the room. Jackson took my coat from the back of a chair. "May I drive you home?" he asked. I nodded and Sabrina mouthed, "Go. I'll lock up." Outside, the air felt cleaner than any breath I'd taken inside that house. Snow drifted in soft, forgiving sheets. Jackson opened the car door and waited until I settled inside. My phone buzzed as he started the engine, a message from Sabrina. A photo of the pawn ticket placed beside a lemon bar. Her handwriting beneath it read, 9 in the morning. I typed one word back. Yes. Dawn broke pale and thin across Denver, the kind of cold morning where sound feels slower and breath comes out in fragile clouds. I woke to a phone buzzing nonstop on my nightstand, missed calls from Greg, 2 messages from the controller, and an email from a lender marked, "Urgent account suspensions. Pending confirmation." Snow coated the windows like someone had pressed frost against the glass from the outside. I sat up slowly, feeling the heaviness of last night's dinner still lodged under my ribs. Nothing about this day would be simple. Sabrina texted at 7:22. "Please meet me at the pawn shop. Bring coffee. No punctuation, no explanations. Just a plea." I bundled into my coat, grabbed 2 lattes from a cafe still waking up, and drove through streets muffled with fresh snow. When I pulled up outside her apartment, Sabrina slid into the passenger seat, her eyes swollen but determined. She clutched her coat collar like armor. "You okay?" I asked. "No," she said. "But I'm here." The drive south was quiet. Trees along the boulevard dripped with icicles, and the sky hung low like it was listening. Halfway there, Sabrina let out a shaky breath. "I barely slept," she whispered. "Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Dad saying he didn't ask you to be the bank." I didn't respond. Some truths hurt too much to echo. The pawn shop was smaller than I expected. An old neon sign flickered over the window, and the door chimed when we stepped inside. The place smelled like velvet dust and old coins. Behind the counter stood an older man with silver glasses perched low on his nose. When Sabrina handed him the pawn slip, he hummed thoughtfully and disappeared into the back room. I felt her fingers twitch beside me. "What if it's gone?" she whispered. Her voice broke a little on the last word. "It won't be," I said, hoping I wasn't lying. The man returned with a small velvet box. He set it gently on the counter like it was breakable. With a soft click, he opened it. Our mother's ring glowed in the dim light. Gold, simple, familiar, the one she wore while whisking Sunday pancakes, The one she tapped against the steering wheel when thinking, the one she twisted absent-mindedly when she hugged us goodnight. It still shone, still carried her warmth somehow. Sabrina pressed her hand to her mouth. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I reached forward and lifted the ring. It felt heavier than I remembered. On the inside of the band, so faint only sunlight could reveal it, were her initials, a whisper from another life. Was she wearing it when Sabrina couldn't finish the question? No, I said softly. Dad pawned it in the spring after she died. I found the ticket last night. She nodded slowly, the truth landing like a bruise. I paid the fee, the velvet box tucked into my coat pocket like a heartbeat. We drove north in silence, the ring between us, without needing words. When we pulled into the lot outside Hale Mountain Realty, reporters had already gathered cameras pointed at the entrance, breath fogging the frozen air. Is it true there's a financial review? Can you comment on forged signatures? Is Aspen Ridge collapsing? Sabrina froze, but I slipped an arm around her and guided her through the doors without looking back. Inside, Mara Benton, the interim CFO, stood waiting with a binder in hand. Her suit was crisp, her expression calm, her presence sharp enough to cut through the chaos. We've begun the audit, she said, and several red flags surfaced overnight. The lenders extended cooperation. But the next 48 hours will matter. She handed me a section of the report. The header read, "Unauthorized transfers pattern detected." My stomach tightened. The pattern matched the Stone Ridge transactions. Before I could speak, the elevator dinged. Greg stepped out alone. No entourage, no swagger, no script. Just a man who had run out of places to hide. He nodded stiffly to Mara, then approached me. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. I might take a leave of absence. The board thinks it's best. He swallowed hard. I never meant for you girls to get hurt. My heart squeezed, not with forgiveness, but with clarity. Greg Hale was no villain carved in marble. He was a man built on the fragile scaffolding of his own pride. He met my eyes. You did what I couldn't. You told the truth. I didn't respond. He walked past us down the hall, shoulders sagging as if the weight he carried finally belonged to him. In a conference room, Sabrina and I sat together with hot coffee cupped between our hands. She stared at the table. All those years, she whispered. I kept trying to impress him, to help him. I thought I owed him loyalty. I touched her hand gently. Loyalty without honesty isn't loyalty. It's fear dressed up as devotion. She exhaled shakily. Mom would want us together in this. I nodded. She would. We sat quietly for a moment, two daughters learning how to rebuild with the truth instead of appearances. Mara called us an hour later. We're starting interviews, she said. Full disclosure to lenders. Legal's involved, but we will get the company stabilized. She placed a hand on the trust folder. You stepping forward saved this place, Marissa. Don't underestimate that. The sincerity in her voice made something warm flicker in my chest. When we finally stepped outside, the snow was falling again. Soft, steady flakes drifting through the gold winter light. Sabrina pulled her coat tight and whispered, Dinner tonight. Just us. Yes, I said. Just us. The ring box felt warm in my pocket like a promise carried forward. As we crossed the parking lot, my phone buzzed with a new message from Greg. Thank you for coming yesterday. I didn't reply. Not out of anger. Out of peace. Snow drifted past my window in slow, wandering spirals, each flake catching the orange glow of the streetlights as night settled across Denver. I sat on my couch with a blanket wrapped around my legs, the apartment quiet, except for the soft hum of the heater. The candle on the coffee table, cedar and citrus. My mother's favorite scent burned low, filling the room with a warmth that felt like memory more than heat. For the first time in weeks, my phone wasn't buzzing, blinking, or demanding anything from me. The silence felt earned. I stood and walked to the window, watching the world soften beneath the steady fall of snow. Cars crawled slowly along the street, their headlights carving faint paths through the white. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded into nothing. Life kept moving. But tonight I stood still. My laptop chimed on the table. An email from Mara, initial audit findings stable. Lenders cooperating. We're moving forward. I read it twice, letting the relief settle slowly, carefully. The company would survive, but only because the truth had finally been allowed to breathe. I typed a short reply. Thank you. Keep everything transparent. Then I closed the laptop. The weight of leadership didn't frighten me anymore. Not the way the weight of silence once had. A soft knock sounded at my door. Sabrina stood there holding takeout bags and wearing the same oversized sweater she practically lived in when we were kids. Her hair was messy, her eyes tired, but they were clear. I didn't cook, she said. Obviously. I laughed and let her in. We sat cross-legged on the floor eating dumplings from paper cartons, a movie playing quietly in the background, but neither of us really watching. For the first time in years, we talked without performing. About Mom, about Dad, about all the things we learned growing up in a house where appearances mattered more than feelings. I used to think you were so strong, Sabrina admitted. Because you didn't need Dad's approval. I looked at her. I did need it. I just stopped chasing what he wouldn't give. Her eyes softened. I'm glad you did. We ate in silence for a moment before she reached into her pocket and placed the ring box on the table between us. You keep it, she whispered. You're the one who brought it back. I touched the velvet lid but didn't open it. Not yet. The presence of it was enough. When Sabrina left later that night, the apartment returned to a quiet that was no longer lonely. I cleaned up the cartons, washed the dishes, then sat in the dim glow of the candle until it sputtered and melted into its final pool of wax. My phone buzzed from across the room. A message from Greg. I'm stepping back. I hope you two stay close. Thank you for not letting the company fall. It wasn't an apology, not fully. But it was the closest he'd ever come to one. I stared at the message, waiting for the familiar twist of pain. It didn't come. Some wounds don't close with words. Some close when you stop expecting the person who caused them to fix them. I set the phone down without replying. Later, I slipped the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly, as if my mother had known one day I'd need a reminder of who I came from, not Greg's ambition, not the family performance, but her quiet strength. I stood by the window again, watching snow collect along the fire escape rooftops, turning soft under the growing white. My reflection stared back calm and steady. There was no fear in her eyes, no apology, no shrinking, just a woman who had finally stepped into her own life. Some storms end loudly ripping things apart. Others end when someone finally speaks the truth aloud and refuses to pretend again. Mine ended the moment I realized silence wasn't loyalty, it was erasure, and I wasn't willing to disappear anymore. If you've ever been called too soft, too emotional, too quiet, or too much for your own family, believe me, you're not alone. Sometimes the loudest revenge isn't fury, it's standing tall in the truth they tried to bury. Tell me in the comments what truth you finally spoke that changed everything for you. I read every single one. And if stories like this make you feel a little more seen, stay a while. There's always a place for you here. And if you want to hear the next story, you know where to find me.